In this lesson, we're going to talk about creating methods with input parameters. So this is a variation on the idea of creating a helper method. And as you can see, I'm in CS-ASP_029. This is it is the identical project. It just has a different name to where we left off in the previous lesson. Okay, so I just recreated this from kind of where we left off, and now we can continue on. If you want to follow along with me, certainly you're welcome to. Now, as I take a look at this helper method that I've just created, I'm thinking that I don't really like this solution because each time that I need to add a new calculation, whatever's beyond gallons, then I'll have to modify this little check that I do right here, increasing the possibility that I introduce a bug into the existing code. Now, I might, depending on the situation, I might prefer to allow each radio button's helper event handler to pass in the measure to cup ratio. So like whatever we're supposed to multiply. So for example, I guess it's 2 cups in a pint, 4 cups in a quart, and so on. So that measure to cup ratio, and then be able to use that instead of doing this check right here to calculate the resulting number of cups in our calculation. Okay, so to enable this, what I'm going to do is actually change this calculate cups method that we have here, and I'm going to allow an input parameter to be passed from the event handler call to our calculate cups method, and then we can kind of eliminate this whole section of code here. So what I'm going to do is double measure to cup ratio. Okay, and now this is essentially defining a variable that I can use throughout the remaining body of my helper method. Now notice when I added that, immediately all my calls to calculate cups previously are now decorated with a red squiggly line. If you hover your mouse cursor over it, it says that there's no overload for method calculate cups that takes 0 arguments. We'll talk about overloaded methods a little bit later and what that really means, but for now you can just take that error message to say that you're not calling the method properly because the method now needs a measure to cup ratio in order for you to call this method. Okay, so we'll have to go back and fix all the calls to calculate cups in just a moment. But let's go ahead and continue on here. So now what I can do, in fact, I'm just going to look at this. I'm going to remove this whole thing. I'm just going to delete all that code, and I can do it all right here now. So cups equals quantity times measure to cup ratio. And everything will continue to work, I think, as long as I make the changes here, just the way that it did before. Now, this call is going to be problematic, so I'm just going to comment that out. Admittedly, now we can't do that with the text changed on the quantity text box anymore. We'd have to go and work a little bit harder at this. But for the rest of the calls, we can just pass in. For example, there is a 1-to-1 ratio between cups and cups. There's a 2-to-1 ratio between cups to pints, a 4-to-1 ratio of quarts to cups, or cups to quarts rather, and a 16 to 1 ratio between cups and gallons. Okay? And now whenever I run the application, it should still continue to work the way that I intended originally. And let's put 6. All right, that works, that works. Okay, very good. So here we've defined one input parameter to our method. We can define as many input parameters as we need. And so the idea here is that we can separate what's the same and what's different between each call to my helper method by passing in what's different, and then everything else that's the same between all the calls will just be, in the logic of the code block. So what's different each time is the measure to cup ratio. And let's suppose, for example, that we want to include or change up this message to be a little bit more descriptive. So for example, I could do something like this. So we'll go 0, and we'll do like this would read something like 2 gallons is equal to, and then we'll go so many cups, like that. And we'll just change that up like this. And now we'll go string.format instead here. All right, we'll wrap that around there, like so. We'll get rid of all this. And so here what we want to do is pass in the measure name. So I'm going to add another parameter, string measure name, like so. When I do that, here again, I'm going to get the red squigglies on all calls to calculate cups. That's fine. We'll go back and fix that. And here what we want to do is we want to get the quantity. So quantity, and then the measure name. I can access measure name. It's just like any other variable. It should have a value passed in through the input parameter, and then finally we'll want to put the number of cups, like so. And in this particular case, we'll go the N2 and the N2 like this. All right, because we're dealing with doubles. And now what we need to do is just go back into each call to calculate cups and pass in a string. So something like gallons here, and quarts here, oops, and then pints here, and then, this is kind of silly, but cups here. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. Now let's run the application. All right, so let's go ahead with 6 pints. 6 pints is equal to 12 cups. All right, how about quarts? 6 quarts is equal to 24 cups. 6 gallons is equal to 96 cups. Awesome. So we've learned how to create a single input parameter and 2 input parameters, and we could add as many as we needed to add. Just keep adding a comma to separate each of the combination of a data type and then kind of a variable name, an identifier that we want to use throughout the body of the code block. And then we can access it just like any other variable that has a value inside of our code block for our helper method. Okay, so that's the idea of input parameters and how helpful they can be. And also we talked about the notion of separating what is the same and what's different, what's variable. You pass in the variable, and everything that's left the same is the logic of your code block. Okay.